Hi, I'm Willy Bearden, and welcome to Dialogue. If you've ever watched my show, if you've heard me speak out in public or anything, you know that I always talk a lot about encouragement and how encouragement can really change a life. Well, today I have a guest who is a good friend, but who has kind of been my guru and kind of led me along in the past few years through encouragement and just talking to me. And I think everybody needs their person like that. So today I want to introduce you to Murray Reese. And Murray, thank you so much for being here. This is a real treat for me. We've known one another for 30 years.
Many moons.
Yeah. And I do want to thank you for always kind of being there for me and giving me good advice, and you've got a good critical eye and a sharp mind, and you've always given me the best of that. So thank you, and I know you've done that for other people too.
If I have in any way, even slightly, been a part of all the wonderful things you've become, I think my life has been pretty successful.
Well, you've been a big part of that because, you know, every time that I talk to you, you always encourage me. You've always, things that I had questions about, you always knew about those things. So I do appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Today we're talking about you.
Ooh.
And so, you know, what I want to talk about, and as you know, I do this show because I believe in what the library does. I believe in the mission of a library. You know, this is going to be here.
It's our wisdom, it's our heritage, it's our history.
Yeah.
This has to be here.
That's right. It's going to be here in 100 years and 200 years and all of this. So our conversation that we're doing today, which is March of 2018, is going to be available for people to see if they so wish, you know, in 100 years. And that really makes me feel good. So we're gonna tell your story today.
Oh, golly.
What was your first memory?
My first memory, golly, I thought you were going to start out with an easy question.
I was going to throw you a curveball just to get started.
My father carrying me through the snow. It was, and I found out afterwards I was 9 months old.
Oh, really? You're that far back? Oh, wow. Okay. So you grew up in New York City.
Yes, but I was not born in New York City. I was born in Poland.
Oh, you were born in Poland. I didn't know that.
And I came to the United States when I was 11 years old.
Okay. Wow. Why didn't I know that?
Well, it's...
I think I knew your parents were born in Poland. Yeah, okay.
And I was an immigrant. And, you know, you just skip over a lot so you can get to the present.
Yeah. So what do you remember about Poland?
That it was cold and that it was... we're going to get into a part of a history. I don't know if we want to do that. I was born as World War II started.
Really? Okay.
And so we had to flee Poland in order to survive, and we were taken prisoners by the Russians.
Really?
And the first 4.5 years of my life was spent in a Siberian labor camp.
Really? I never knew that.
And then after that, we made our way to the United States via France and South America, and then here.
Wow. So, do you want to talk about this? Your memories of the Siberian labor camp?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, there are memories, but it's not. I sort of always believe that the more important part of one is what they're going through.
Right.
And I think that as part of your growth, you probably need to leave your life story behind so you can evolve.
Oh.
And the more you stick to your life story, the more you are what you were instead of what you could be.
That's very interesting and very wise, because yeah, I mean, if you're always anchored in where you were and what you were, then you really can't get unmoored
Can get on
and move on.
And it's much more interesting to grow. It's much more interesting to see what you can become and where you can go and how you can develop all your creative possibilities than what you were then.
Yeah. Wow. So when you came, what year was it when you came to the United States?
1951.
1951. Okay.
September 1951, 50 years before 9/11.
Okay. Wow.
A little coincidence, but
Yeah.
probably doesn't.
Wow. So where did you where did you land? I mean, did you come through Ellis Island?
Came through Florida.
Okay.
We came from Ecuador, flew into Florida, and then we took a bus to Brooklyn from Miami.
Really?
And experienced all the wonders of the Eastern Coast,
Yeah.
including the seats in the back of the bus were long, and so I went back there, wasn't busy, and I laid down to sleep, and the bus driver stopped the bus and made me move to the front.
Really? That wasn't your place to be.
That was not my place to be.
Did you understand what was going on?
Not at all. He didn't tell me. He just said, "You can't, this is not for you, you have to move to the front."
Wow. Wow.
In sign language, because at that point,
Yeah.
I couldn't understand English.
Okay. So you wound up in Brooklyn. Did you have relatives there?
Yes, my grandparents and 6 other uncles had come a year earlier.
Okay. Okay. So obviously your parents had been in touch with them, and they were ready, with open arms for you guys to get there.
Oh,
I
yes,
guess. Huh?
yes.
Oh, so many great stories have started in Brooklyn.
What is it about Brooklyn that attracts people with stories?
Yeah, it's kind of the center of the universe, I think.
Actually, I had a hard time leaving Brooklyn when I was when I went off to graduate school. I was going to make arrangements for my parents to send me food. I didn't think that the rest of the United States really knew about good food, and
Really?
and then I got to Rhode Island, and they had all the good food.
So what were your favorite things to eat in Brooklyn? I mean, was this were you like a kid in a candy store on the streets of Brooklyn with...
But we lived on top of a toy store. So my favorite thing was I would walk out, and there were all the new toys, and I had to check out everything in the showroom. And then next door was a bakery, and their aroma was constant. It was just... And then 2 doors down was a deli.
Oh, yeah.
So just by walking down the street, I got fattened up.
I bet.
Every time.
Wow.
And the neighborhoods, all the neighborhoods in Brooklyn are self-contained. So within a walking area of 3 or 4 or 5 blocks, you can find grocery stores and bakeries and food shops and ice cream stores and shoe stores and clothing stores and everything. And even though if you want something really serious, you get on the subway and go somewhere. But pretty much in your neighborhood, you got everything.
Yeah, that's your little town.
That's your little town.
Yeah, wow. And so you went to school there. How long did it take you to learn English?
6 months.
Really?
It was either that or else.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So were kids nice to you?
The kids were nice. The bus driver sometimes wouldn't be nice. He'd yell at me in English and didn't know what he was talking. I didn't know what. But you learn really, really quickly. It's amazing.
Yeah.
My son graduated White Station High School, and the valedictorian was a young woman who had come from Vietnam 2 years before.
Wow.
And she spoke this eloquent English. And in 2 years, not knowing any at all, just speaking Vietnamese, she learned how to speak. Everybody was bowled over. And that's kids, when you have to, you do it. The best way to learn a language is go someplace where nobody can understand the language you speak.
Yeah.
In no time at all.
Yeah. Total immersion.
Total.
Yeah.
You'll be speaking.
Wow. That's something. So did you have a job when you were a teenager?
One of my uncles, one of my wonderful uncles, they all were one. This one particular one said, you can't be 11 years old and not have a bicycle. So he bought me a bicycle, and I soon started just riding around the neighborhood. And a pharmacist caught my arm and said, I need some prescriptions delivered to people who can't get out. Would you? I said, sure. So when I was 11 years old, I started making a little money. Okay. So one time I was standing there and waiting for a prescription to get finished, and on the shelf there was a camera. And I started looking at it, and I said, how much? And it had dust on it, and he gave it to me like for 75 cents or something.
Okay.
And so I taught myself how to take pictures and develop them, and soon after that, people would invite me to come and photograph their parties or their kids.
Okay.
So that when I was 12 years old, not knowing what that, I didn't have any designs on that, I started making a little money, enough to support my habit of making pictures.
Wow. So this was a plastic camera?
It was a point and shoot.
126?
126.
Okay.
And the camera was plastic, the lens was, all you could do is just click the button. And it was good enough.
Yeah.
I learned what kind of light it worked in. There had no provisions for flash and it was great fun.
Well, I bet. And then you got out and met people because you were out doing this with people. So yeah. So you probably became like
and people would
a very popular guy.
People would have. Then neighbors found out, and one of the lady at the bakery store wanted to send pictures to the newspaper. She invited me to photograph some of her. In return, she gave me this wonderful cake, and I brought a cake home. My mother wondered where I got it.
So what happened to all those? Do you have any of those photographs from that time?
I don't. I think I have one. I have one of a friend of mine who's since left the country, moved to Jerusalem. And I gave him the picture as a parting gift, and that's all I have.
Okay. Wow. So you're going to school and then high school. You graduate from high school. What year? Probably 50.
58, late
58.
58.
Okay. Yeah.
And
What did you were you thinking about? Okay, this is my plan. Did you have a plan when you?
I had no plan whatsoever. I came to this country that was it was so rich in everything. I had to. My plan was to experience whatever I could.
Yeah.
And in high school, by the end of high school, I got a hold of a better camera, and I was taking pictures. And for some reason, I wound up taking pictures for that annual, the book that they put out at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I became, and more I learned about photography, and friends would show me things. And I had one particular friend who had a dark room in his house, and he learned from his father, and I came to his house a lot to learn, and he taught me things. It's interesting how, if angels come along the way in your life.
Yeah.
They bring you information. I've always found that if I'm ever lost and I need an angel shows up and go that way.
Right. Right.
Or do this, and my whole life has been that way. And so along the way, people would show me about in photography, or I became interested in painting, and there was all these wonderful schools. So I went to. I had no money, and my parents had no money, so I went to a city university, and they had a great art department. And then I realized I got a degree in liberal arts with an art major that I didn't know about anything.
Yeah.
I got a degree in nothing. That's what I always thought.
Yeah. That's funny.
And so I decided I was going to go back to school, go to an art school.
Uh-huh.
And Cooper Union in New York is an art school that there doesn't have any tuition if you can get in.
Really?
It's open to anyone, and in the United States, if you can get in, it's tuition free.
Wow. What a nice thing.
It's Peter Cooper, who I think had something to do with the elevator. Okay. I don't know. He endowed the school. Uh-huh. And so I got into that school, luckily for me, and there I met wonderful artists who the school, as a way, it was their mission not to have a lot of full-time teachers, but had a lot of current working artists to come in and teach a class or two. Uh-huh. And so you got to meet a lot of magnificent artists in New York who had an afternoon free and would like to come and teach. And
sure.
And by way of that, I had an art education.
So this would have been early '60s. So were these the beatnik times?
These were the beatnik times.
Yeah, in New York City. And Allen Ginsberg. And were you aware of the beat poets and people like that?
I was aware of the beat poets. I was down the street. Allen Ginsberg would sometimes come and read us poetry. Cooper Union is on 8th Street and the Bowery, and McSorley's bar was 1 block away. It was a men's only bar.
Oh.
Where you can come and sit, a la Starbucks, where you can come and sit and have 1 cup of coffee there. You can come to McSorley's, have 1 jug of beer, and stay there all day long, read your books.
Uh-huh.
And people would come and read their poetry to one another and carry on. And
okay.
And down there was a jazz place that Thelonious Monk would come sometimes, and so it was a magnificent time.
Yeah, very rich culture. I mean, you could
and
reach out.
It was the underground culture. It was, you sort of had to know about it.
Yeah.
And if you hung out around there, you did. And the people in the Bowery, there were the Bowery bums, and a lot of them just didn't want to work, and a lot of them probably they were trust fund kids, probably.
Yeah.
They just didn't want to work, and they'd come and clean your windows for $1, and if you didn't want to give it to them, they'd say something nasty to you and go to the next car.
Wow. So that was kind of the heyday of New York City, wasn't it? I mean,
that was a pretty terrific time. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay, so you're in graduate school at this point. Well, what were the kinds of things you were learning? I mean, did you feel like you were kind of a sponge and just ready for all of this information?
Well, I decided I was going to go to graduate school in photography. That was I realized of all the things that I was doing, that was what I really loved the most. So I found out that Harry Callahan, who was having a lot of shows in New York, was teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design. So I called him up and I said, how do I come and be one of your graduate students? He said, well, you have to come and show me some pictures. Mm-hmm. That's all he said. He just some pictures. He didn't say 10, 50. Well, I amassed a whole bunch of pictures, and I drove from New York to Providence, 4-hour ride, and I met him, and I put down this bunch of pictures on this table, and he turns over 2 pictures. He says, "Okay, you're in."
You're in.
And I
And
said,
that was it?
"Well, what about the rest of the pictures?" He said, "No, you're in." "Well, don't you want to look at the rest of the pictures?"
Wow.
And there were 5 of us, and 4 of the other photographers had a lot of experience being photographers, and I learned a lot from them. From Harry, I learned how to see, but from them I learned all about photography, and it was a magnificent environment.
Yeah.
The most unstructured graduate program you could ever think of at that
Really?
time.
Really? How did it work? I mean, did it just tell you
You met with him in his house every other week.
in his house?
In his house on
Okay.
Sunday,
Okay.
and you were expected to bring work.
Oh, okay.
And he didn't tell you on what or how many and we came together, and one guy had the habit of bringing 1 photograph every other week.
Wow.
And he and Harry would never tell you anything about your pictures. He would say, "Mm-hmm. Ooh, okay. All right." And that was it.
Really?
And but just by the mere fact that you had to work all the time, that's what I found out. Harry
Yeah.
photographed for 2 hours, at least 2 hours every day,
Really?
no matter what.
Wow.
If it was raining, he'd photograph in the rain.
Uh-huh.
If he was sick, he'd photograph in bed.
Wow.
If he was in an airplane, he'd photograph on the airplane. He
Okay.
photographed every single day, and then he processed the pictures, and he made prints, and he was very proud of it. He would show us, and he had little piles of prints for every day, and every day he would put his pile of prints away, and then he would look at the pile of prints from 30 days ago,
Uh-huh.
and he had this huge trash barrel, and he would throw away, and by the time the year went by, he had maybe 3 to 10 photographs left.
Really?
And I was saying, "Harry, all you have is 10 photographs?" And he says, 10 photographs. If I photograph for 30 years, I'll have 300 great photographs. Tell me an artist that has 300 great works of art.
Wow. That's profound.
And that was the lesson. And so you throw out a lot, you
Yeah.
photograph every day,
Yeah.
and for many, many years, and still today, I'm photographing regularly.
Mm-hmm.
People will ask me, "How do you become a photographer?" And all I say is, photograph every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you've got to use it.
Every day, and then you become your own teacher. And there's also a story that I had read right around then, that in Zen calligraphy, when the student first come, the teacher sends him to the corner of the garden, the same corner, for a whole year, and he is to draw out with a pen the leaves or whatever is there, the same ones over and over and over for a full year.
Wow.
At the end of the year, in Zen terminology, is you feel the leaf, you become one with the leaf.
Uh-huh.
And you can see, and there's pictures of it, how their strokes, they're inside the leaf. The stroke is like that.
Wow.
And in photography, it's the same thing. You want to learn photography, go to the same spot
Yeah.
over and over and over again until one day you extricate out of that spot the perfect image. You know, if you go to all there's photographs that you take and there's photographs that you make.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Zion National Park or you go to Arches, and there's a guy who sends out a newsletter. It's if you stand on this spot at 3:30 in the morning when the sun is coming up and you point your camera that way, you'll have a great photograph.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of camera clubs that do that.
Yeah.
They go there and take those pictures, and God bless them.
Yeah.
And but if you want to make your own great photograph,
Wow. Wow. So the the tool of the camera, it used to be, and I'd say 25 years ago certainly, it was a fairly rare thing for somebody to have a good camera.
Right.
They were very, very expensive. I mean, you bought a Hasselblad or a Leica or something. It was a very, very expensive tool, so not many people had them. What do you think, has it been a good thing or a bad thing that cameras are ubiquitous? I mean, we all carry really a high quality camera in our pockets now. And I think nothing about taking 4 or 5 photographs every day, just of things. Photograph my food, just hold it out the window and just take a photograph. You don't have to process anymore. It's free to do that.
Well, I've always thought that photography was a great democratic process, and that anyone, we all want to communicate. We all want to say things. The worst thing you can do in photography is look at a lot of pictures other people made, and then you go and duplicate them. What's become now is that we all have our cameras, and we can all spontaneously take pictures, and people take magnificent photographs.
They do.
On their own.
Yeah.
Without having looked at everybody else's. I've got grandchildren who have these cameras, and one of them has a father who's a photographer, and my son-in-law, and those kids have grown up looking at pictures, but they've run off and they now take pictures that sometimes just I go, wow, that they can do that. I think it's great.
Yeah.
We look for ways to communicate, and so now we have another tool. I think it's great. And taking a lot of pictures digitally is it's not wasteful. You take a lot of pictures and you keep one and you delete the others.
Yeah, I read something a few years ago. Somebody was kind of bemoaning the fact that everybody had a camera now.
Why?
And somebody answered that and said, well, when pencils became ubiquitous, that didn't destroy the writing game. It just gave everybody the opportunity to write. And
everybody can speak. Imagine that. Everyone can use words.
Yeah.
And write poetry, and
that's wonderful. What are what do you feel like were your steps in becoming who you are? Did you just kind of say yes to life when things came along?
I sort of grew up with my parents. My parents would call it with a good dosage of chutzpah. And sometimes I just marvel that at this point in my life I'm still alive. That I would stick my foot or my hand in things that I had no business doing just to find out what it was all about. And I still do that. I encourage people to do that. It's try anything that you don't know anything about. And I've gotten the way I travel with Karen, my wife, is we let's say we're going to Italy, and always say, okay, we'll go to Milan. And then people ask me, well, what are you going to do? And I say, I don't know.
Sure.
And what do you? Well, we'll probably get a hotel for the first night, and then if we like it, we'll stay there. Otherwise, we'll move. And then we decide we'll walk around. Oh, let's do that, and let's do that, and by the time that we are leaving, we have discovered all kinds of things.
Yes.
Anyway, I sort of lead my life that way.
That's admirable, because most people have to have so many plans. They have to know exactly where they're going, what time to do this, and where they're going to go. And even I've seen people who were having a wonderful time somewhere go, well, we've got to go. Wait a second, if you're having a good time, why not stay?
Yes, and I that would be deadly to me.
Wow. So let's talk about how you wound up in Memphis. It's kind of in one sense it may be a little unlikely for somebody who had grown up in New York and kind of the East Coast mentality
yeah.
and all that, and then you wind up in Memphis. How did that happen?
I was in my last term of graduate school. Harry Callahan decided he was going to go on sabbatical, so I was teaching some classes, and the phone rang, and the director of the Memphis Art Academy, now Memphis College of Art, called, and he had the list of graduates, and he said, "Do you want to come and teach in Memphis?" And me, a radical of the 60s, burst out laughing.
Did you?
And he said, "Well, don't laugh. Why don't you just come and check us out?" I said, "All right,
Yeah.
I'll come and check you out." And I came here the weekend that Martin Luther King was shot.
Oh, really? Wow.
And he showed me around, and he took me to Mayor Loeb's office, who promised me that everything was going to be just fine.
Really?
And took me to...
You met the mayor, so you came in and he introduced you to the mayor.
I never understood that. Ted Rust knew the mayor, he knew the head of the city council. Then I went to meet the head of the city council. I thought, wow, to get to work here, you have to know all these people. And Downey Pryor was head of the city council, and he sat me down. We had a cup of coffee, and he said, this is all going to get settled just fine. Don't take any of this as a big problem.
Yeah.
And then on the way out, Martin Luther King was shot.
Wow. Wow.
And it was a magnificent time. And so I liked the city, and also it was really seductive. He said, "Here is the men's locker room. We want a photography department. You'll do it."
Really? So you could set it up any way you wanted?
Any way I wanted
Yeah.
to. So I thought, well, I'll come here and stay for 2 years. And there's something about Memphis. It was really magnificent. And I got, at that time I was exhibiting a lot, and I got offers to, "Why don't you come here?" And, well, this is a good place, but it's not like Memphis. They would always wind up, it's not like Memphis.
Yeah.
And,
What is it about Memphis?
there's something, maybe we need to check astrologically or something about Memphis. Ultimately, it comes down to its people. If you live in New York, you might have one or two friends nearby, but the city itself is cold.
Yeah.
Memphis is warm. Memphis is a community. It's inclusive. You soon become part of some tribe in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And creative people, it's very nurturing to creative people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd watch musicians and writers and artists, and the art academy was just full of these artists that they all came from everywhere, and they were doing beautiful work. Yeah. And it was all just regional. None of these people, if they were in New York, that who knows what. But here they were nurtured and loved, and it was a magnificent place to be a creative type. It still is.
Yeah.
It still is. We nurture creativity here.
Yeah. There don't seem to be a lot of rules here either. I mean, it's like you can kind of, if you want to do it, there's not a lot of hoops you have to jump through.
Exactly. That's right.
And I think to establish yourself in another place is probably would have been much harder than it is in Memphis.
What you're doing, you would not be able to, with the ease and the facility and the grace and the expertise that you do this. I don't know any other city that you could be able to come to it so easily.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree.
And that's not in any way to diminish what
Sure,
you're doing.
yeah.
It's just that an awful lot of magnificent people get overlooked in other cities.
Right, right. Because you're not, you didn't graduate from here, or you don't have these credentials or whatever. People here really don't care about that too
Yeah.
much. It's what you wind up doing. And I think that goes, it's the same thing. Sam Phillips, when Sam Phillips was, engineering those live radio shows down at the Skyway Room with the Peabody, he was the AV guy, and recording this stuff, and during the day he was recording people that nobody else wanted to record, but B.B. King and Howlin' Wolf and all this. But I think that is a typical Memphis story.
Exactly. That's right. That's right.
So
And sometimes those people stay here.
Yeah.
And sometimes they go forth and they're successful in other places. But I mean, I know a whole bunch of artists who went forth and they said they'll be the first to admit this is where it came from.
Yeah. Wow. So after you got here, after you spent that 2 years here, were you torn? Did you want to go other places? I mean, you were obviously you've shown at the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, they own some of your work, right?
Yeah.
Not many people can say that.
There were at that time photography was sort of flourishing, and it was growing all over. And colleges were looking for people with experience, or people who had done something, or people who were. So I had already had experience in setting up a department, and some universities called and said, "Would you be willing to come, and we'll double your salary, and we'll give you a." And I kept, and really my answer always was, "It's a good place, but it's not. Memphis sort of seeped into my being at that point."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, someday maybe I'll leave.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly not going to come back to New York.
Yeah. Did you have a lot of connection with the Jewish community here in Memphis?
At the same time, I was also beginning to examine or delve into my spiritual and philosophical leanings, and I was reading a whole lot about it, and so the Jewish community was not. I understood that, but what I started looking into was more Eastern philosophy. And at the same time, I also got invited to come and teach in Israel, which I took a year off from the art college and did that. So I went and taught there for a year, and then and that was a whole other experience. But I see myself culturally, because I grew up in that culture, Jewish, but also I found a lot of meaning and more to my way of seeing what life is about in terms of Eastern thought, and now I'm sort of a Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, all together.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a difference.
Right. But it's what makes sense to you. Right?
Yeah, and I'm happy to go to a church on Christmas and to a Buddhist temple, or I go to a meditation group regularly and go to synagogue for some holidays, and
Yeah.
I haven't made my way to the Muslim temple yet. I need to check them out.
Yeah. Well, I think being open to what's around you, I think that's the key to a rich life. And so many people limit themselves by putting labels on themselves. This is who I am, this is what I am, and I can't color outside the lines here.
Well, that's how we started the discussion in terms of the first thing you need to do if you want to grow is drop your life story.
Okay. I'm going to think about that.
The more you hang on to your life story, the more you're stuck.
Yeah. Okay. So, what's it like to be a teacher?
It is immensely exciting and immensely humbling. You think your job is to really impart some sense of knowledge to someone who doesn't have it, but there's so much more, especially when you're dealing with creative people. Really the knowledge of any. Van Gogh learned how to paint all by himself, and he painted intensely and passionately for 10 years, and he died. But the stories of people who taught themselves how to paint or photograph, or a lot of great photographers when I was coming up, they taught themselves.
Yeah.
You just went into the dark room and you started fumbling around until you figured out you knew what you were doing. And same thing with writing, and along the way someone will come and say, this sounds better than this looks better, this. But so when you're teaching, you have to take into consideration the person you're teaching, the group that you're teaching, the subject that you're teaching, and how much you don't want to give too much information, because the process of growing is about the process of discovering, and you want the person who you're teaching to discover. This Gestalt psychology has this moniker that you draw a circle, but you don't close it. There's some part of it that's open.
Yeah.
And then there's another circle that's closed. The circle that's got some part of it that's open is a lot more interesting than the closed one.
Right. There you go. I love that.
So you want teaching to do that. You want to give enough information so someone can go and get started and then discover for themselves, but you can't give them the answers.
Right.
The answers come from their personality and their background and who they are as a being. And if they do that, if they follow those steps, then they grow as a human being and they grow creatively. If you give them the answers, then they don't. You just close it.
It's funny, and a lot of that just kind of feeds into the notion of your level of passion for doing something. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, and people still always tell me, I want to do what you do. I always tell people, come sit with me. Come sit with me, because I sit in a little dark room and edit films or write or whatever. Come do that. But they never seem to get around to it. Most people never seem to get around to it. Yeah. And that just tells me that, that they're not passionate, and they haven't decided what they actually want. Something looks cool to people, or it's like a lot of filmmakers. I've found that a lot of people who, aspire to make films wind up really just wanting to go to the after filming party. That's, it's the social thing of it. But you have to have
some inner drive. There was a period of time, and I don't know the coincidence or the cycle of life, I got a lot of phone calls from people who were telling me, I'm about to retire, and what I've always most wanted to do in my life is to become a photographer. Would you helping me get started? I said, sure. Yeah. And so we get together, we meet and say, I said, well, what kind of things are you interested in? I said, okay, here's your first assignment. Bring me back 10 pictures at the end of the month and show me what you did. And out of, say, 50 people or 100 people that have approached me that way, only one showed up.
Really? Wow. I've kind of been my experience too. People want to say they're doing something, but they haven't moved beyond you. You know, it's like, I want to be Murray. You know, I want to be passionate like Murray. I want to be successful like Murray, but
and if they really do, they don't need Murray. They could just go ahead
and do it.
Just do it.
Yeah, right. I will say this. Several years ago, and I won't mention this person's name, but a friend of mine asked me, said his son wanted to get into photography. And I said, well, there's one guy he needs to talk to. And I had never met the kid. But he came and saw you.
He did.
And
he came twice.
Yeah.
And he did, and I gave him assignments both times.
Right.
And he did them.
Yes. And he wound up going to school, to a photography school in Paris. And he moved to New York City and was a photographer. He was...
And still is.
And still is. He lives in Los Angeles now and has done extremely well. But his dad, who's a friend of mine, always tells me, he said, it was Murray who gave him permission to do this.
Right.
And then he went out and did it.
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess maybe that's the whole thing. I think you've given me permission to do a lot in my life, you know, and not, you know, I didn't go to graduate school. I didn't do this. You know, you're like, hey, just go do what you do.
Do it.
Do what you do. And I think that people need that permission, though. You know, it's hard if you're kind of, you know, nobody, and nobody's nobody, but still, if you think, you know, I want to break into this business, I want to be an artist, whatever, you know, and you don't have credentials, you know.
No, we think that there are these secrets to whatever it is that we think that other people know, and we don't.
Yeah.
And I, for a long time, I believe that, and the secrets are whatever it is that you think the secrets are, and you discover those secrets for yourself.
Right.
And someone who does things passionately and just does them, he's got the secret. That's it.
Yeah.
Doing what you want to do passionately.
Right.
That's the only secret there is.
Right. That's words of wisdom. Let's talk a little bit about the books that you've written and made. Tell me what was the first book you did?
The first book, I haven't written any books, but they're all comprised of my photographs. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine, William Parker, was commissioned by Collins Publishing to do a book. It was called a sleep book, and a woman had taken passages about sleeping, dreaming, what happens. And again, it's sort of the creative process. And he was asked to illustrate the book, and he called me and said, would you mind if I used your photographs to illustrate the book? So it was just my photographs. And so I gave him, I don't know, 100 of my photographs, and he used, so that was the sleep book. That was the first book that I did, mm-hmm. and actually got paid. Mm-hmm. And then sometime later, Perry Magnus did a book about 19th century architecture in Shelby County, and asked me to do the photography. So I did that, and then Perry Magnus again was doing the book on Elmwood Cemetery.
Yeah, and I must say those are some beautiful, beautiful photographs.
And well, that cemetery allowed itself to be photograph, and I became good friends with the place, and it's really it's just a magnificent place, and the stories that are there and ever changing and newly created stories are, they have the Gypsy Corner where the gypsies come together every December and bury their people, and also at the same time they figure out who they're going to marry. And
that's right. Yes, it's a big, a big marriage.
it's a big
Bizarre, bizarre, maybe.
How magnificent that is,
Yeah.
and then more book, and then I did some smaller books, and I was asked to do the photographs for First Shooting Light, which is about duck hunting.
So that doesn't seem like a typical thing that you would do.
I've always wanted to do books. The first book I did, the sleep book, was of my. I guess I do what seems to be on the outside personal photographs, and then photographs that seem to be practical. So if I did a book of Memphis, Shelby County architecture, those are more practical, where someone else sort of set the limit. So First Shooting Light, or the Elmwood Cemetery, you said, just here's this place, make us some beautiful photographs. I can put both, make them personal and for a purpose, and then First Shooting Light became the same thing.
Yeah. So that was just a story of duck hunting.
Duck hunting.
And being out with people early in the morning.
And I never understood why people get dressed. I mean, you get dressed with enough clothing, you look like the Pillsbury Doughboy. And then you get up at 3:30 in the morning and you go stand in freezing water and you wait for the ducks to show up so you can kill them. And I wrote that to a friend of mine in New York, and he said, people really do that? Really?
It does sound like a bizarre thing.
It does. And then to find out that I met all these wonderful people who also contribute to the conservation of the land, so that they will have this land where they can raise duck food, millet and rice and corn, and they flood it, and so they conserve the land, which is sort of, that's a good thing, and then they dedicate it to duck hunting, and it's a camaraderie, it's a community. We all need tribes to belong to, so they're very tribal, and
that's interesting. With some beautiful photographs in that book.
Well, if you stand in the water and wait for the sun to show up, it's a no-miss situation, really. Don't tell in this.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you really, it's like going to Arches National Park, and if you stand at this one spot when the sun comes up, you'll always have a great photo. Well, if you want, go duck hunting, go 3:30 in the morning, stand in the water, and watch the sun come up, aim your camera, you'll have a great photograph.
Okay, wisdom from Murray. What are your truths? Do you have, things that you've learned in your life that are, kind of your foundational truths?
We're going to get into spiritual stuff. So, you know how every snowflake that falls is different from every other snowflake that has ever been or will be. Every leaf that was, or will be is different from every other leaf.
Yes.
So each one of us is different from whoever was before us and who will come after us and who is now. Our task is to find out what that essence of us is and act it out and sing it out loud.
Wow. Wow, that's profound.
And sometimes it sort of leads you to a spiritual base.
Yeah. And is that the advice you would give people?
I would if someone was at the point, I think they'd have to be at certain age or certain maturity to hear that, because otherwise it sounds pretty confusing.
Yeah.
But that would be the advice I would give to someone.
Yeah.
Find out who you are.
Yeah.
And that's really hard.
Yeah, it is.
It's not, it doesn't, and when I was teaching, it would also be that way. It's not, well, one of the assignments I would give my students, and so you have a pen pal, let's say in China, where they don't speak English, and you have to send them pictures to tell them who you are.
Yeah.
I want you to bring me 5 photographs or 10 photographs next week that does that.
Sure.
And the first batch would always be, I like to eat sandwiches. They would take a picture of a sandwich. I like to wear a lot of cotton clothing. They would take a picture of that. And I like to drive a fancy car. They would take a picture of that.
Yeah.
So is that you? Is that what the things you like? Is that really you?
Yeah.
And anyway, that's literal. You could write it better than.
Yeah.
So then they have to rethink that. And the second part becomes hard. Now, who are you? Is it the things you like to do? Is it things you like to eat?
Yeah.
Who are you? That's when it becomes interesting and hard.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I can't believe it, but our hour is up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can't, and it's been fascinating. It's always such a pleasure for me to talk to you and to spend time with
Well,
you.
thank you, Willie.
And we've always had great conversations, and I really do appreciate your thoughts and your guidance and just being who you are, because I know that you not only have done these things for me, but you've done it for hundreds and thousands of other people, and people who've been in your classes and people that you've eaten dinner with and just been around in your life. So I just want to thank you for that. It's been very important to me, personally, and I just maybe want to say thank you from our community to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all the goodness and all the service that you do for our community. You enrich it so overwhelmingly. Thank you.
Well, and I really want to thank again Murray Reese for being here and being such a good friend and a good person from Memphis. So thank you for being here. And you know what? We'll see you next time on Dialogue. Thank you very much.